The fluorescent lights at Fresh Mart on Route 9 had been humming the same note for 6 years. Sarah Calloway knew this because she had stood under them for 6 years, and the hum had become so familiar that she only noticed it on mornings when everything else was too quiet to ignore. This was one of those mornings, 5:47 a.m., and the store held the particular emptiness of a place that hasn't yet decided to be open. The produce misters cycling on, the floor still wet from the overnight mop crew, the self-checkout machines blinking awake like something that had forgotten it was supposed to be cheerful. Sarah's first customer of the day was a woman in a tan coat who did not look up from her phone once. Not when she pushed the cart to the belt. Not when Sarah said good morning. Not when a jar of pasta sauce nearly rolled off the edge and Sarah caught it with one hand without breaking her scanning rhythm. 4218, Sarah said. The woman tapped her card, took her receipt, left. Sarah watched her go and thought. Some people move through the world like they're the only solid thing in it, and everything else is just furniture. Then she went back to wiping down the belt because thinking about it didn't change it, and the next cart was already coming. She had learned that a long time ago, not from a book, from her father, Roy Calloway, who used to say that the trick to hard work was to find the rhythm in it and stay inside the rhythm. And when something tried to knock you out of the rhythm, a rude customer, a broken scanner, a day that felt like it was built specifically to humiliate you, you just found the beat again. He had said this while pruning roses at the Harrington estate at 6 in the morning before the family was even awake. He said it the way people say things they've had to earn. 27 years ago, she had been 17, and the biggest problem in her life, or so she'd believed, was standing at the front of Mr. Beckett's AP English class reading her essay out loud while her voice threatened to shake, and she wouldn't let it. She'd written about the space between what people say and what they mean. She hadn't known at the time that this was going to be the central topic of her entire adult life. She'd just known she believed it. She read it clearly, a little fast, chin up. When she sat down, the class was quiet for a second in the way that sometimes means something landed. After class, in the hallway that smelled of old carpet and pencil shavings, a voice behind her said, "That was actually good." She turned. Daniel Harrington, back row boy. His family's name was on the wing of the school library. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not unkind, not warm. Somewhere in between, like he'd surprised himself by saying it. She had never figured out if it was a compliment or if it was just shock. She never got the chance to ask, because 3 weeks later, her father came home in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and that didn't happen. Roy Calloway never left the estate before 6. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and said, "They let me go, Sarah girl. Said I took something. I didn't take a thing." And then he sat down at the kitchen table and didn't get up for a long time. The world reorganized itself around that fact. Everything after was measured from it. Back on the belt at Fresh Mart, Tuesday morning, present day, Sarah's candy box of cereal and a 6-pack of sparkling water and a birthday card that someone had left face up, and she read the front of it without meaning to. Happy new chapter. She turned it face down and kept going. At 9:15, her manager, Dennis, appeared at her register with the look he wore when he was about to ask her to do something uncomfortable but had decided to frame it as an opportunity. "Got a minute?" Break room. She followed him back through the stockroom, past the cardboard bowler that needed fixing and the coffee maker that had been almost working for 3 months. Dennis set a business card on the table between them. White card, simple logo, a staffing agency she didn't recognize. They called the store directly, he said, looking for someone for a temporary domestic position. Private estate, out on Ashford Road. Live out, Monday through Saturday. They'll pay. He slid the card forward with one finger. $22 an hour plus travel. Sarah looked at the number. $22 an hour was 3 times what Fresh Mart paid. Emma's medical debt was $14,000. The payment plan was $200 a month, and Sarah had done the math on that commute many times in the dark. "How long is temporary?" she asked. 4 to 6 weeks, maybe longer, they said. She picked up the card. She turned it over. On the back, someone had written the address by hand. Ashford Manor, 1240 Ashford Road. Her thumb went still on the card. "You know the place?" Dennis asked. "I know the road," she said. She said yes before she thought about it too carefully, because she had learned that thinking about things too carefully was how you talked yourself out of keeping the lights on. That evening, she drove out on Ashford Road as the sun went low and orange over the flat Texas fields. The iron gates of Ashford Manor swung open when she gave her name at the intercom, and she pulled through slowly, gravel clicking under her tires. Then she saw the east garden, every rose bed in exactly the same position her father had put them, the same arching border of boxwood along the south wall, the same stone path he had laid by hand one summer when Sarah was 9 years old, before she understood that some things a man builds are not his to keep. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands. She looked at the garden for a long moment. The roses had gone dormant for the season, all brown canes and bare earth, but the shape of it was his. Entirely his. Still here. Still standing. She did not let herself cry. She put the car in park and got out because that was what you did next. She walked through the staff entrance without looking back at the garden. The morning of the day her father was fired, Sarah had stayed late after school to finish a paper on The Great Gatsby. She remembered that specifically because she had written the last paragraph about how some men build things they are never allowed to own. Her English teacher had circled it in red and written precise in the margin. Sarah had been proud of that word. Precise. She got home at 3:15 and found her father sitting at the kitchen table in his work clothes, which meant something was wrong because Roy Calloway never sat down in his work clothes. He always changed first. He said dirt belonged outside. He had not changed. Dad, he looked up. His face had the particular stillness of someone who has already spent all the shock and is now just waiting for the feeling to catch up. Sit down, sweetheart. She sat. The kitchen smelled like the coffee he had made and not drunk, the cup still on the counter, going cold. Mr. Harrington, let me go today, he said. What? Why? He says I took something. He folded his hands on the table. His knuckles were cracked from the October cold, the skin around his nails permanently stained the color of good soil. A pair of silver candlesticks from the dining room. Sarah stared at his hands. 27 years later she would still be able to close her eyes and see them, wide and flat and absolutely, categorically honest. That's a lie, she said. I know it is. So we fight it. We tell someone. Tell who? He said it gently, not as a challenge, but as a real question, and that was somehow worse. His word against mine, Sarah. I'm the man with the soil under his fingernails. She wanted to say something that would fix it. She was 17, and she still believed that the right words, arranged precisely enough, could correct an injustice. She had written an essay that proved it. She had gotten a circle in red ink. She said nothing. Roy nodded like she had answered him anyway. He never fought the charge. He was 54 years old and he was tired, and the Harrington name in Greenfield carried the kind of weight that bends steel. He collected unemployment for 6 months, then got work at a garden center on the edge of town, and that was that. The pension, 30 years of it, stayed in the Harrington family's pocket. Sarah learned the truth about the candlesticks 7 years later from a woman at church who had briefly worked in the manor's accounting office. The elder Harrington had sold them to settle a gambling debt 3 weeks before Roy was fired. The theft charge had been the solution to 2 problems at once. It explained the missing candlesticks to his wife, and it cleared the pension liability from the books. Neat, precise. The elder Harrington had known a useful word too. On her first day at Ashford Manor, Sarah was given a staff uniform, a printed schedule, and 40 seconds of orientation from the head housekeeper, a brisk woman named Dolores, who moved like someone permanently behind schedule. Second floor is Mr. Harrington's. You don't enter without knocking, you don't rearrange, you don't linger. Understood. He's difficult. I've met difficult. Dolores looked at her with something that might have been approval. Tuesday and Friday are linen days. Everything else is on the sheet. The house was exactly as she remembered and completely different. Larger, somehow, than her childhood version of it. Quieter. The grand staircase still had the same carved banister. She'd watched her father polish it once, kneeling on a towel, but the smell was different now. Cedar and antiseptic and the faint machine hum of medical equipment somewhere above her. Daniel Harrington existed on the second floor like a closed weather system. She learned his patterns without meaning to, the way you learn the sounds of any house you move through daily. The creak of his wheelchair near the window between 10 and 11 in the morning. The silence that meant he was reading. The different silence that meant he was not. On day 4, she moved the book from his nightstand to dust beneath it and set it back in what she judged to be the same place. That's not where it was. She turned. He was watching her from the wheelchair, jaw set, eyes flat. She picked the book up, set it 3 inches to the left. It's back where it was, she said, without heat, without apology. He stared at her. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second, long enough to be a person, Asto, and left the room. That night she called Emma from the staff quarters, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed. How's the new job? Emma asked. Fine, Bug. It's fine. She pressed her palm over the phone speaker until her voice steadied. Then she took her hand away. Tell me about school, she said. Tell me something good. Emma told her about a history project, something about maps and borders, how some borders make sense and some are just lines someone drew and told everyone to respect. Sarah listened and said the right things, and after they hung up she sat quietly for a moment in the thin yellow light of the bedside lamp. On day 5, she was carrying fresh towels down the east corridor when she passed the study. The door was not quite latched. Inside, Marcus Harrington's voice was low and careful and completely clear. Je t'avoue, the timeline for the filing needs to move up before the end of November, Greg. That's not a suggestion. Then the door clicked shut. Sarah stood in the corridor with a stack of folded towels in her arms and the specific, very cold feeling of something important landing exactly where she did not want it to land. She walked on. She did not stop. She counted her steps to the linen closet. 14. She put the towels away. She folded the last one twice, the way she always did, because it steadied her hands. The corridor outside was quiet. The manor made its old sounds, the tick of pipes, the settle of floorboards. Sarah pulled the closet shut and stood there for a moment in the narrow dark, thinking about the word timeline. Then she went back to work. That evening, around 9:30, she was heading for the back stairs when Linda Okafor came out of the east wing at half a run, her phone pinched between her ear and her shoulder, a clipboard in one hand and her keys in the other. Sarah. Linda's voice was tight but not unkind. I need a favor. The pharmacy held the delivery. I have to sort it out, and I've got Daniel's sister on this phone, and she won't stop talking. Can you sit with him just until he sleeps? Read to him. There's a book on the nightstand. Read to him. He likes it, or he tolerates it. Same thing, with him. Linda was already moving toward the far end of the hallway. Thank you, seriously. And she was gone. Sarah stood at the door to Daniel's room and knocked twice. No answer. She pushed it open. The room was dim, one lamp on low, the amber kind that doesn't commit to anything. Daniel was in the bed, flat on his back, staring at the ceiling. He didn't look at her when she came in. There was a paperback on the nightstand. She picked it up. Some thriller with a shadowed face on the cover. She sat down in the armchair beside the bed, found the page with the dog ear, and began to read. Chapter 7. The detective knew he was being followed because the footsteps behind him kept stopping a second too late. Daniel said nothing. She read on. Her voice was even, not performing anything, just moving through the sentences like she was reading a grocery receipt. The lamp made a small circle of warmth. Somewhere in the hallway, a heater kicked on. Around page 40, the words started to blur. She blinked once, twice. The book was still in her hands. Then it wasn't. Ostomne YouTube dieskilaborosa ti iendo kikoderonda ideli vodumpa bio Eurohost itseromaj. At 3 in the morning, Daniel opened his eyes. The lamp was still on. The room was quiet, and there was a woman asleep in the armchair beside him, not slumped dramatically, just tipped slightly to one side, her head resting against the wing of the chair, the thriller loose in her lap. One hand had fallen open, palm up, like she'd let go of something on purpose. He watched her. She wasn't performing sleep the way some of the nurses did. All careful breathing. She was actually gone. The kind of sleep that means a person has been running on not enough for a very long time, and the body has simply made a decision. He noticed the other book then, small, square-spined, tucked in the front pocket of her apron, worn to softness at the corners. He couldn't read the title from where he lay, but the cover had that particular faded look of a book that had been opened hundreds of times. She was nobody managing him, nobody waiting. She was just a tired woman in an armchair, and that was so strangely ordinary that he lay there for a long time and did not look away. Opinions. She was 20, working her first cashier job at a drugstore on 5th, and she'd called her father from the break room because she needed to tell someone. I got it, Dad. They said yes. Roy's voice on the phone was warm and a little rough. Course they did. You'll be good at it. It's just a register. You'll be good at anything that requires patience. A pause. That's not a small thing, Sarah. Most people don't have it. She'd laughed it off then, the way you do at 20 when a compliment feels like a suggestion to want less. She understood it now. She woke at 4 with a jolt, her neck stiff and the thriller half on the floor. The lamp was still on. Daniel's eyes were closed. Sarah stood up carefully. She set the book back on the nightstand. She straightened the armchair cushion without knowing why. Then she slipped out, pulling the door closed behind her without a sound. She did not know he had been awake for the last hour. She did not know he had watched her leave. In the morning, Linda was refilling the bedside water when Daniel said, without preamble, Who was the woman who read to me last night? Linda looked up. That's Sarah. She's the temp. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means something is settling. Tell her she can come back tonight. She told Linda she would come back. That was all. She didn't ask why he wanted her there, and Linda didn't explain, just nodded and went back to refilling the water. 3 years ago, Sarah almost didn't go to the reunion. Karen had called twice and texted 4 times and finally showed up at the door of the house on Birch Street and said, "You are not spending your 22nd anniversary of graduating high school sitting here with a microwave dinner." So Sarah went. She came straight from Fresh Mart because there was no time to go home and change, and she walked into the Millbrook High Gymnasium still wearing her green uniform shirt with the name tag clipped to the pocket. Sarah, in black letters on a white background. The gym smelled like rental tables and cheap white wine. She found Karen near the punch bowl. She smiled at people she half remembered. She ate a small plate of food that tasted like nothing in particular. And then someone said, "Daniel, come meet," and there he was. He looked like money. There's no other way to say it. Tanned, easy in his shoulders, the kind of man who has never once searched for parking. He looked at her face, then at her shirt, then at her name tag. His expression didn't change into cruelty. That would have been better, in a way. Instead it stayed pleasant, a little distant, the way you look at something that isn't quite interesting enough to focus on. "Sarah," he said, like he was reading it. "Danielle," she said, "we were in a P English together." "Were we?" Not a question. Then he smiled, the way you smile at a story someone else is telling, and he said, "You smell like the register." Someone laughed. 2 people, maybe 3. The sound bounced off the gym ceiling. Sarah smiled back. She had learned that smiling is faster than explaining, and she said, "Excuse me, I need to," and she gestured at nothing and walked toward the door. She stood in the parking lot for 10 minutes. The night air was cool and smelled like cut grass and car exhaust. She stood between 2 pickup trucks and looked at the rectangle of yellow light coming from the gym doors. Her name tag caught the light. Sarah, like a label on something you buy and use and don't think about again. She went back inside after 10 minutes because she had told Karen she would stay, and Sarah Calloway keeps her word. She never told Karen about those 10 minutes. She never told anyone. Day 8 at Ashford Manor. She had been reading to Daniel for 6 evenings in a row. He never commented on the books she chose. He stopped making the small cold remarks he'd aimed at her in the first week. It wasn't warmth. It was the absence of friction, which is its own kind of quiet. She was carrying a stack of folded laundry down the east hallway at 9 in this evening, past the study, when she heard Marcus's voice through the gap in the door. "Thursday works, the evaluator is already confirmed." Another voice, careful and bloodless, slightly flattened by speakerphone, "Greg Solis. And he has no knowledge of the assessment." "None. He thinks it's a routine physical follow-up." A pause. "He won't fight it. He's too far gone." The board vote. 7-4. It's done. Sarah stood in the hallway. 1, 2, 3. The laundry pressed against her forearms, warm from the dryer. She focused on that warmth. She counted seconds because her mind needed something to hold on to. 4, 5, 6. She thought about her father, about Roy Calloway sitting in that small house on Birch Street, 30 years of work traded for a fabricated theft charge and a broken pension and a pride he never quite repaired. 7, 8, 9. She thought, this family does this. This is what this family does. 10. She thought, I am the only person in this hallway. 11 through 30. She set the laundry down outside the study door, carefully, without a sound. Then she walked to the east staircase and started up toward Daniel's room. The lamp in Daniel's room threw a narrow wedge of yellow light across the floor. She could smell the book he'd been reading. Old paper, something slightly sweet and dry. He was propped against the headboard. The lamp angled so the spine of the book caught the light. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She did not sit down. She stood at the foot of the bed. Her hands were loose at her sides, not clasped, not hidden, just there. He read her in about 2 seconds. What happened? He said, not a question. A door opened. She told him, plainly, the way you tell someone the weather, when the weather is going to cost them something. She told him about Marcus and Greg Solis, about the phone call in the study, about the words mentally incompetent and board approval and 30 days. She watched his face while she talked. He didn't move. His left hand rested on the wheelchair rim beside the bed, and somewhere around the part about the legal manager's voice, his grip tightened. She saw it, but she kept going. When she finished, the room was very quiet. He stared at the wall across from him for a long moment. Then, why are you telling me this? She had known the question was coming. She had been carrying the answer up the east staircase. "Because I'm Roy Calloway's daughter," she said. She watched that land. "Roy Calloway," she continued, "who was your family's groundskeeper for 30 years, who was fired when I was 17 years old. Your father told everyone he'd stolen a pair of silver candlesticks from this house. Roy Calloway, who had never stolen anything in his life." Daniel's knuckles went pale against the wheelchair rim. "The pension was never paid," she said. 30 years of work, and your father walked away from it with a lie, because it was cheaper than honoring the contract. My father never recovered, and not really." She stopped. Then she said the precise thing. The one she'd decided she owed him. "I know it was your father. Not you. I am not standing here accusing you of something you didn't do," she exhaled. "But I have spent 27 years watching what happens when powerful people aren't held accountable for the damage they cause. And I am not going to be the person who walks past it one more time." The lamp hummed faintly. His grip on the wheelchair rim hadn't loosened. He asked her one question. "How old were you?" 17. He closed his eyes. She thought about Millbrook High, senior year AP English, the classroom that smelled like chalk and old carpet. 17-year-old Sarah standing at the front of the room, reading her essay aloud in a voice she'd steadied through pure will. She'd thought the whole time that Daniel Harrington was staring out the window, bored, elsewhere. She learned tonight, watching his face, that she'd been wrong. He had been listening. He'd just been 18 years old and had never once been taught what to do when something moved him, so he'd done nothing. He'd looked away from the window, set his expression to neutral, and done nothing. Daniel opened his eyes. "I need you to stay in the house tomorrow," he said. His voice was different, not softer, steadier, like something had been decided. Sarah looked at him. "Why?" "Because Marcus is coming at 10, Daniel said. "And I need a witness." She said yes. She didn't know what else to say. She was back in her room by midnight, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, her work shoes still on. She could hear the old manor settling around her, the tick of pipes, the creak of a floorboard 2 hallways over. She did not sleep for a long time. At 9:45 the next morning, she was standing near the staircase in the grand foyer, when she heard Marcus Harrington's car on the gravel drive. Daniel was already there. He had asked Linda to help him dress. Actual clothes, a button-down shirt, dark trousers, his hands folded in his lap. He had positioned himself in the center of the foyer, with the deliberateness of someone choosing a chess square. The morning light came through the tall windows and caught the dust still hanging in the air from the night before. Marcus walked in without knocking. He never knocked. He saw Daniel. Then he saw Sarah. His face did something small and fast, a recalculation, the kind a man makes when the room is not the room he expected. He recovered in under a second. "Danny," he said, "you look good." "I know what you filed," Daniel said. "The psychiatric evaluation request, Greg Solis, the board vote you were scheduling for the 14th. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. "Daniel, you've been under enormous stress. The injury, the isolation. I've been worried. We all have." Daniel laughed. It was a short sound, not warm. The laugh of someone who has just recognized an old trick wearing a new coat. "Dad used that line on Roy Calloway," he said. 30 years, and that's still the play." Marcus went still. He looked at Sarah, then back at Daniel. "Who told you about?" "I did the math myself," Daniel said. "I just needed someone honest enough to make me do it." There was a silence that lasted maybe 4 seconds. The grandfather clock near the east wall clicked once. "You have 24 hours, Daniel said. "Resign from the board, or I take the recording." He lifted his phone from his lap, just slightly, just enough, to the full board and the Texas State Attorney's office. Marcus straightened. He smoothed the front of his jacket. He said nothing. He walked to the door, opened it with both hands, and stepped out. He did not slam it. The soft click of the latch was somehow the loneliest sound in the room. 2 days later, Roy Calloway was at his kitchen table on Birch Street, turning the soil in a small clay pot of rosemary his daughter had brought him in September. The morning radio was on low. He heard the mail slot. He got up slowly, the way a man of 71 gets up from a chair he has sat in 1,000 times, and he picked up the envelope from the floor. Inside, a check, a legal document. 30 years of pension, backdated. And a letter, handwritten on Harrington shipping letterhead, formal in the first paragraph and then less so, and then at the bottom, in smaller letters, a single sentence that was not formal at all. "Your daughter read to me when I'd forgotten how to listen. I'm sorry it took this long." Roy sat with the letter for a while. The rosemary on the table smelled like something clean. Marcus Harrington resigned from the Harrington Shipping Board within the 24 hours. The public statement cited a breach of fiduciary duty under review. There was no graceful exit narrative. At the next board meeting, no one mentioned his name. On day 11, Daniel called Sarah into his study. "I want to offer you a position," he said. "Community liaison for the Harrington Foundation. The role doesn't exist yet. I'm building it." Sarah looked at him. "I have a shift at Freshmart on Thursday," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll work around it." He smiled. It was small, a little rusty. The smile of someone who had forgotten the mechanics of it and was now remembering one careful degree at a time. She almost smiled back. The next morning she walked out through the east garden before her shift, in the grey-pink light that comes just before the sun clears the tree line. The rose beds her father had planted were still in their same positions, still exactly right, still patient. She didn't stop. She kept walking. But as she passed the long hedge, she ran her hand along the top of it. One slow, unhurried gesture, the length of maybe 6 steps. Then she dropped her hand and kept going. Some things don't need a word. They just need to be touched once, so you know they're real.